Welcome back. I hope you had a nice break, a good refresher. So we're going to go into the second part, but before we go into that, I wanted to show you a film clip that didn't record from before about how parents can talk to kids about suicide, and then we'll move on with the second part of our co-parenting presentation.
I think parents feel uncomfortable talking to their kids about suicide, first of all, because it's so scary, right? There's nothing more terrifying than to think that your child is thinking of killing themselves. If your child is acting different than normal and you're worried, there's no one that knows that child better than the parent. And so it's okay to sit them down and say, you haven't been acting like yourself. I'm worried about you. Is there, have you been having any thoughts about killing yourself? Sometimes kids get so sad that they think about killing themselves. Have you had those thoughts? And in a way, if you normalize it for them, if you say, you're not the only kid on the planet that's ever thought, has been so upset that you thought that life wasn't worth living. Sometimes kids think about all kinds of things, and sometimes kids think about hurting themselves. Do you ever have those thoughts? And if the child says, oh, Mom, I never have those thoughts, then you just say, okay, well, I'm just checking. And if you ever do have those thoughts, you can always come talk to me about it. And then sometimes you'll get a surprising answer where they'll say, yeah, sometimes I think about it. And then what do you do, right? And you don't want to say anything like, well, that's crazy, or that's not going to solve anything, or you're not going to kill yourself. Don't be like that. You want to say, wow, you must be feeling really bad. Let's get through this together. How can I help you? Let's make sure you have the tools that you need to help yourself if things ever feel so bad, because your life is the most precious thing, and we need to help you figure out how to get through this crisis.
Okay. So often it's difficult to know how children respond to divorce. So sometimes you can tell for children who don't have language yet, or who don't have the abstract reasoning to put words to how they feel, or who aren't ready to put their feelings into words. It's too painful to do that, or too difficult to do that. Sometimes you can tell how children might be feeling about parental divorce by looking at their drawings. So here is one drawing, and if you'll see in the drawing, there's a picture of a heart with Mom on one side and Dad on the other side, and Kathy in the middle. So this is showing a broken heart, separation of the family relating to divorce. Here is one, and let me tell you what it says. Divorce feels like 1,000 knives stabbing me all over my body. Ouch. And then you see the little guy is saying, ouch, ouch. And it's a little guy with knives all over his body. So clearly the message of this drawing is, this is very painful. It hurts all over my whole body. And on this drawing, it says choices, choices, choices. And the little girl is saying, I'm confused. And you see, there's Dad's house right here, and here's Mom's house right here. And notice that there are signs on the roads that say one way, one way, one way. And she's in the middle of the road, and clearly she's feeling very confused. So she feels like she doesn't have a choice. She can't connect with both parents. And so she's in a confused and painful place. So, alrighty. So, What are some factors that influence children's response to divorce? The child's age and stage of development is one factor. Of course, an infant might not be aware that a divorce is happening at all, while a teenager might be acutely aware of what's happening and might ask for lots of details about it. The suddenness of the divorce or separation. So typically for human beings, things that happen all of a sudden are generally harder for us to deal with. The amount of conflict in the home is another factor, and this can vary by the home. In some homes, this could mean loud arguing or, God forbid, physical violence, while in other homes there can be, silent avoidance, not going into shared spaces, and just kind of looks that kill happening with with members of the family. The presence of intimate partner violence, emotional, verbal, physical, or sexual abuse, adds an element of trauma to the healing process. Similarly with the presence of child abuse, which would also add an element of trauma to the healing process. The child's level of maturity and personality can sometimes also play a role, and how and what the child was told about the divorce. Let's talk a little bit more about how children respond to conflict and the impact of violence on children. So we're all here for different reasons. Some might have mutually decided to end the relationship. Some might have been left and had no choice in the matter. Some are here because of gambling or substance abuse ravaging the family. Others might have experienced verbal, physical, sexual, and/or emotional abuse. Regardless of any of those situations, our children are still going to rely on us to take care of them and to help them through this difficult time. Kind of like the example we shared about before, parents don't take sick days, and we don't have the luxury of falling apart. Of course, it would be ideal for children to have access to unconditional love from two parents. However, in situations of intimate partner violence, then a parent might be a truly single parent following a divorce because it's not healthy for the parent or for the child to be exposed to violence. Remember that while it's ideal for a child to have the love and support of two loving and caring parents, all that's necessary for a child is to have the love and support of one loving and caring parent. So some questions to keep in mind as we talk about intimate partner violence. How do children define conflict? What are the risks for children from families with conflict and violence? And what do children learn from parents arguing and witnessing physical violence? So how do children define conflict? Just like any one of us was. If I talked to you and I was telling you that when I went to work, people were yelling at me and criticizing me and calling me names, they were threatening me or hitting me, you would tell me this is unreasonable. These are terrible working conditions and you need to quit that job. So in a similar way, children would define an environment like that as a negative and violent environment. What are the risks for children from families with conflict and violence? Both boys and girls can either identify with the victim and become a victim of intimate partner violence, or boys or girls can identify with a perpetrator and become abusive to their future partners. What do children learn from parents arguing and witnessing physical violence? That the way to solve problems is through yelling and hitting, and relationship violence becomes normal after repeated exposure. So, a child that grew up in a home with yelling and hitting, they're not going to get a red flag if they get into a relationship. Once they become a teenager, they're not going to get a red flag if a partner becomes abusive with them. It becomes okay and even expected. So children who've been exposed to intimate partner violence should be evaluated by a mental health professional. At the Penelope House Domestic Violence Shelter, they do, in Mobile, they do offer outpatient services, and they have a play therapist on staff that can meet with the children to evaluate their mental health. Okay, so outside of abusive situations, co-parenting is the ideal situation for raising children following a divorce. So parenting is a lifelong responsibility. You see the events that are listed on the slide there: school events, activities, graduation, induction in the armed forces, graduation from college, marriage and the birth of grandchildren, and events in the lives of the grandchildren. We go to all of those events. We will go to all of those events all of our lives to support our children. Our children want to need both parents at these events, meaning that both our roles in the events and contact with our ex-spouse is oftentimes lifelong. Even though a marriage has ended, a family must continue. What do children get from being part of a family? Nurturing. They learn about socialization and how to make their way in the world. They learn, who am I in this world? What do I stand for? What are my values? What is my culture? What are my strengths? Clearly, it's best for children to have a relationship with both parents, so long as both parents are not abusive. So this new relationship with the ex-spouse is no longer about the romantic relationship, but now it's about providing for the children. It's specific to meeting the needs of the children, and it's created for the children. Many times, parents would not talk to each other following a divorce, but because they still have children, that's why they still continue to talk to each other, so that they continue to raise the children together. It may be inconvenient at times, and it needs to be formed despite anger, resentment, or pain. Of course, we have to mention child abuse as another exception to this rule. If it's unsafe for a child to be with a parent, co-parenting doesn't apply. What does unsafe mean? Physical, sexual, or emotional abuse of children, or a history of domestic violence. Unsafe does not mean parenting choices that are safe but different, or having a house that's less organized but not dangerous, or setting limits that the child doesn't like. The co-parenting relationship allows children to still have a family even though the intimate partner relationship between the parents has ended. What is co-parenting? It's ongoing communication and decision-making, sharing time with children and the responsibility, and separating issues from being former partners with continued parenting roles. It's not about getting adult needs met, rehashing issues, getting back together, being husbands, being partners with each other again, or getting back together with your former spouse. Why co-parent? Our children are used to being raised by you and your former partner. So the more that you and your former partner continue to raise the children following the divorce, it's the biggest factor in determining children's adjustment. So it leads to stability for the children when parents continue to work together to raise the children following the divorce. What are the goals in co-parenting? A relationship which minimizes conflict, new ways of communicating with each other, and new ways of making decisions together, a more business-like way of interacting with each other. How to set up a co-parenting relationship? You want to set boundaries in the beginning. So the first thing to do when you want to set up a co-parenting relationship is to try to set up a realistic relationship. So you want to set up some boundaries to begin with. For example, one good boundary is we're going to talk about the kids, not about our personal lives. And then decide, how do you want to communicate? There are many options in today's world. There's email, there's texting, there's talking on the phone. And there might be other options as well with social media. So decide how to communicate, and then how often to communicate. And then decide, what if there's a big decision that needs to be made? How are you going to make joint decisions? So, for example, we'll discuss it on the phone after the kids are asleep and agree on what's best for the kids. So one important thing to do to try and keep things peaceful is to communicate in a business-like manner. And one factor with that is to try to, just as you would at work, keep emotions out of it. And because you're trying to compromise on issues relating to the kids, it's important to hear the other person's perspective, but also to share your perspective. So you want to listen, ask questions, present your opinions, and then use I statements. And what that means is, rather than saying, oh, that's just like you, you're just like your mother, you never want to do things that are best for the kids, or you never want to spend money or something like that. Instead say, I'm concerned that if we don't invest in a car that has safety features, then the child might wreck the car and we could lose him right after he gets his license. So if you're stating things from your own personal perspective, it's less likely to arouse defensiveness and anger from the other person. Try to focus on one issue at a time as you're working through issues. If you do find that you are arguing and getting into a fight, it's okay to allow for 2-minute timeouts. If you do make a mistake, you mentioned talk about somebody's mama or something like that, it's always appropriate to say, I'm very sorry, I shouldn't have said that, and then try to apologize and not make the same mistake again. If you find that you're running off at the mouth, or texting, you're running off at the thumb and just saying things that you shouldn't be saying, then perhaps looking into another way of communicating, such as email, where you'll have a minute to think before hitting send, might be helpful. Sometimes when you're communicating, like I say something and you say something, and I say something and you say something, that can lead to, especially early on, right after a divorce, it can lead to misunderstandings. So it might be better to, like I'm saying what I have to say, and then I send after proofreading it, and then you can read everything that you want to say and send it back. So what you're trying to do to shift a relationship from an intimate relationship to one that has a little more distance embedded in it might feel awkward. And can be very difficult. It might take practice. You're working on trying to be emotionally detached in the relationship. And you might find that you have to fake it before you actually get to this point of being emotionally detached. Why are we doing all this? Because we are putting our children's needs above our sense of justice. So it's yet another sacrifice that we're making for our children. With co-parenting, sometimes there might be an arrangement that would need to be flexible. So, for example, if a parent has a job in which they travel, then the other parent might need to be flexible with when the child can come over, and wait until the parent is back in town and is kind of settled in from the job. Also, with older children, sometimes it's helpful to be flexible and allowing the child to say when they would like to see the parent. Sometimes with younger children need more structure, and so sometimes, and so it's appropriate to have a more structured arrangement. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's whatever works for the family and for the children in setting time with each other. Co-parenting does take time and patience, and it's helpful to try to be understanding with each other throughout this process. Now, co-parenting, you want to also have independent relationships with the school system. If, God forbid, there was an emergency at the school where your child needed to be picked up, the school should have appropriate contact information for both parents. And if there are meetings at the school or other information from the school that needs to be shared with both parents, it would be appropriate to share that information with the other parent. However, it would also be important to try to go to the meetings. One parent shouldn't have to go to all the meetings and always be sharing information with the other parent. That would be an unfair burden on either parent to have to undertake. What if your former partner will not co-parent? Stay focused on your relationship with the children, focused on their needs. If the other parent does something that's not healthy with the child, so for example, gives them too much information about what happened with the divorce, or says negative things about you in front of the child, or maybe doesn't pick up a child for a visit, all you can do is the best you can do in that situation. So try to focus on the child, try to focus on their needs in the moment, try to help to calm the child down, and and repair. If the other parent did something that caused some damage to the child, try to repair the situation as best you can in the moment. So, for example, if the other parent said something about the divorce and shared too much information with the child about the divorce, and then the child is asking you questions, you can simply say something like, these are adult issues, and it's not anything that you have to worry about. You are still going to be taken care of, and we still love you. And you don't, and so you don't have to worry about what happened with the divorce. It was an adult decision, and it took time to make this decision. And we're both still going to take care of you. So kind of sidestep them asking questions about what happened with the divorce, because that is never helpful for the child to know. Continue to use appropriate co-parenting skills. It might be that the other parent is going through one of the stages of grief, and maybe over time they will eventually get to the acceptance stage. You're working through difficult feelings through a divorce, and it might take some time for the other parent to catch up with you. So continue to operate from kind of a high plane, doing the best you can do, and doing the trying to facilitate peaceful interactions between the two of you, and hopefully the other parent will catch up in time. Even if they don't, if you're acting in an appropriate manner, at the end of the day, you can look in the mirror and feel proud that you acted in an appropriate manner at all times. Try to develop healthy communication with the children so that they will talk to you about things that are bothering them, both about the divorce and in their lives. If the other parent did do something that was negative, let's just say they didn't pick up the child for a visitation, don't try to make excuses for the other parent, because then it might seem as though you think it's okay that they didn't pick up the child. Instead, just again, try to give the child alternative experiences. Like, I'm so sorry that you're disappointed. Why don't we go inside and we'll make some brownies, or something like that, to kind of try and calm the child down in that moment. But also, don't use this as an excuse to badmouth the other parent. Here's a website that has some exercises that a couple of, exes can do with each other to try to start the ball rolling from a conflictual relationship to a more respectful relationship following a divorce. So if you look at this slide, you'll see it has some difficulties that both the residential parent have and the non-residential parent have. So for the residential parent, having the children in the home, trying to discipline and care for the children, not having time for the self, feeling burnt out, resentment for the other parent, having to inform the other parent of things happening. It's a lot of work. Cleaning up after the children, cooking the food, doing the homework, cleaning them, cleaning up after them, etc., etc., etc. Keeping food in the house, all of these things, it's a lot of work. For the non-residential parent, repeated grief when dropping the child off, struggle to find a meaningful role in the child's life, fear of loss of impact on the child's life, reluctance to discipline during the short visit. So as you can see, there are difficulties for both of the parents. There are frustrations and difficulties for both parents. Nobody is having a great time during the divorce, and each parent has a certain amount of suffering that they're having to endure through this experience. So being sensitive to that can sometimes help parents to be more, sensitive to each other and patient with each other. So let's look at some case scenarios. Okay. So Tony, age 14, just spent a great weekend with his dad. They played miniature golf, laser tag, and saw a movie at the new 3D IMAX theater. During their 3 days together, they also went to a pro football game, shopped for rollerblades, and got some new computer games. What was the focus of this weekend? Having fun, wasn't it? And do you think Dad spent any money on this weekend? Absolutely he did, didn't he? He spent a lot of money on that weekend. So while it's okay to spend money on our children, of course we all want our children to have nice things. Sometimes it's during the quiet moments when you're drinking your coffee and they're slurping on their Fruit Loops that more important things come up in the parenting relationship. And sometimes those are the most meaningful moments. Erin, age 7, has always been told that she's just like her father. At a recent family reunion, Erin was standing next to a group of relatives while Mom explained the divorce to a relative. All Erin kept hearing was how her dad was irresponsible, lazy, mean, rude, and inconsiderate. How might this conversation impact Erin? Well, she was always told that she's just like her father. So being told, hearing all these negative things about her father might make her think that these things are true about her. Also, this might give her some negative, she might feel weird next time she sees her dad. Are you really all those bad things I heard them say about you? She might be upset at her mom or at her other relative. So regardless, it is filling Erin with negativity that she shouldn't have to be exposed to. None of these things have anything to do with her, and it is easily avoided by not saying these things in front of Erin. So that's what we're talking about here. Remember that co-parenting allows children to have a family despite the end of the marriage relationship, involves setting aside issues with your former spouse and focusing on the needs of the children. It involves ongoing communication and joint decision-making based on the children's needs, and it involves shared time and responsibility. Let's talk about talking to your children about the divorce. So here's some questions to keep in mind. What are children worried about? What do children need to hear? And what don't children need to hear? What are children worried about? Kid stuff. They're worried about school, the toys that they want to buy, the next holiday, what they want to do in their room, playing, watching TV, sports, having their friends over, what's happening at school, when is dinner, is your family going to be happy with you? Kids stuff. Kids care about kids stuff. So when we talk to children about the divorce, it's helpful for both parents to give the same basic information and to use those guiding questions and the co-parenting relationship to provide consistency. And you want to focus the conversation on what kids care about. If you're going to be a single parent, there's information in the parent handbook on page 75. Key messages to repeat to children repeatedly through the divorce. Although the marriage has ended, the family will continue. You'll still have relationships with granny, auntie, etc. Although adult feelings can change, parents have special bonds with children that do not change. We will always love you. You can kind of see why that would be confusing. Will you stop loving Daddy? How do I know you won't stop loving me? And so just letting them know nothing could ever make me stop loving you. So just kind of making sure that they're not getting confused about that. And even if they don't say, how do I know you won't stop loving me? Just kind of addressing that by saying parents will never stop loving their children. You will continue to be cared for and provided for. So if you think about that, children don't have a frame of reference for big changes, and that it might feel like the bad feelings of divorce are going to last forever. We're wanting to say things to them that are comforting, that are nurturing. It's kind of like throwing them a life preserver when they feel like they're out in the middle of the ocean about to drown. So we're trying to say things to them that calm them down, that help them to feel safe, that help them to feel loved, that help them to feel like everything is going to be okay. You are in no way responsible for or cause the changes in adult feelings. So we want to make sure, again, that we're taking that burden of responsibility for the divorce and making sure they know that it's not on their shoulders. If you think about it, parents sometimes argue about things that they care passionately about. Most families, most parents have at one point or another argued about something about the children, and the children might have heard that. So you want to make sure that the children know that they had nothing to do with the divorce. They didn't do anything wrong, that it was an adult decision, and that they had nothing to do with it. Sorry. All right, so we have talked about a lot of our goals. So now we need to talk about when to seek professional help and how to know if we might need help in counseling, or if our children might need help in counseling. And then we have a few other things we'll be talking about as well. So one way to know if we might need help is if we're so angry at our former spouse that our anger is spilling out on our children, or if we're stuck at one of the stages of grief, or if our child is stuck at one of the stages of grief. So if we're trying to decide if our children need help in counseling, we want to look for constant and consistent changes in their normal behavior, changes that are dramatically different and that leave us as parents feeling like we can't cope. So sometimes, behavioral extremes might be an indication that children need help. So if there is an absence of sadness, if a child appears to be numb, if they are having a long-lasting depression, so if they are isolating from their friends, if they are showing signs of being really sad a lot of the time, low motivation to do things that they used to care about, if they have a lot of fatigue, appetite or sleep problems, any thoughts of self-harm, any actions of self-harm, or any suicidal thoughts or actions are all indicators that the child needs counseling. If the child is continually acting out, if they're not listening to you, or if they're not listening to other authority figures, they might need a healthy way to deal with anger. Or if they're acting out, like sneaking out of the house, abusing drugs or alcohol, engaging in risky sexual behaviors, these would be obvious behaviors that would indicate that they need some professional help. Or if a child is overly responsible, this is often overlooked. If a child cares so much about what other kids think that they're anxious all the time, or if they care so much about what they look like that they're losing a lot of weight, or they never feel good about themselves, or they're taking on too many clubs or responsibilities and then becoming anxious. These might be signs that they're assuming responsibility for the divorce. If a child is having dramatic and unexplained mood changes, we already talked about a risk factor of wanting to end their pain or having suicidal talk. Increased risk-taking behavior, fighting, aggression, isolation, anything like that. All of these would be indications that a child might need to get into counseling. Where can you go in Mobile for counseling? Lifelines does have a sliding scale fee. They receive money from the United Way, so they're able to see people on a sliding scale fee. Alta Point also receives Medicaid as funding. And they do have, if a child is having suicidal thoughts or engaging in self-harm or very severe depression, Alta Point might be a good choice because they have hospitals and they also have psychiatrists that can prescribe medication if that would be needed in this particular case. The Psychological Clinic, which is operated by the University of South Alabama, they have a training clinic that's operated through the Department of Psychology. And they're able to see children or adults on a sliding scale fee. The cheapest appointment could be as low as $15 a session. And they do have some evening hours available as well. You can find the Psychological Clinic by going to the USA webpage and going to the psychology page. And there's a link to the clinic right off that page. So those are just some examples. If you do have insurance, you can look on the back of your insurance card and find out, call the number on the back to find out how much your copay is and what are some counselors or psychologists that are available under your plan. We also want to eliminate unhealthy roles for our children. One unhealthy role to eliminate is having our children be messenger. So using children to communicate with your former spouse. So for example, if you're scooting the child off to the other parent's house and say, please tell the other parent that we haven't received the child support check yet. If the other parent doesn't like the message that was transmitted, then the other parent could say, oh, really? Well, you tell them I said blah, blah, blah. And then the child is literally caught in between an argument between the two parents. Reporter, using children to find out what your former spouse is doing. When children are at a parent's house and they're asked what's going on over there, children have to tell you what you asked them because you have authority over your children. But yet, children can also feel guilty for telling you what's going on over there. And it's also causing them to notice things they might not have noticed otherwise. It puts children in a really unfair position in which they lose either way. I am not an advocate for spying on your former spouse on social media, but it would be preferable to do that than to ask your children what's going on at your former partner's house. Judges, using children to validate who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Children shouldn't even be in a role where they're judging what happened in a romantic relationship. Children should be the recipients of love from both parents without even having to think about what's happening in a romantic relationship. So always leaving children out of the dynamic of what's going on between the parents, and instead both parents providing support and love to the children would be an appropriate way to look at it. And then confidant, using children as a supportive friend who will listen to you and encourage you. Children need support and love from parents, but they are ill-equipped to be able to provide for adults' complex emotional needs. So unfortunately, it's a one-way relationship. In order for our children, if our children see us crying, they will try to support us and give us, and comfort us. But it's at the risk of not telling us the things that they're struggling with. So it's up to adults to find other adults who can provide support to us, to comfort us, rather than leaning on our children for that. So we do want our children to talk to us about things that they're struggling with in their lives. So if our children are coming to us and starting to talk to us about something that's bothering them, it's really important for us to do like that song from the 80s and stop the world and melt with them. So if our children are talking to us, stop what you're doing. Turn your chair to face the child. Make eye contact with the child. Get on their level if they're still small. Now sometimes it would be important, rather than, children will sometimes say things in the middle, and you would want to correct them if they said something wrong, if they did something wrong. But sometimes it's important to suspend judgment and the desire to teach a child for the time being in order to create an open atmosphere. Let me give you an example. Let's just say you have a child come up to you and they say that they skipped lunch one day. And they tell it kind of in the middle of the story. If you interrupt them and say, "You skipped lunch? How could you do that? You're going to get in trouble. You're going to get suspended," you're not going to hear what happened at the end of the story. But if you sit on your hands for just a few minutes and you listen to what the child is telling you, you might find that the child explains a situation about being nervous in front of the other kids in the schoolroom and feeling scared to go into the lunchroom in front of other kids. Wouldn't you want to know if your child was having social difficulties? Wouldn't you want to know if your child was having social anxieties? That would be something you could do something about. And it's really a bigger issue than skipping lunch the one time. So I'm not saying that the child shouldn't get in trouble for skipping lunch, but what I am telling you is that if you don't interrupt the story to hear them out and to hear why they're telling you what they're telling you, you might miss out on some important details. Let me give you an example. I worked as a college counselor for a long time, and a lot of stories that I would hear about they would talk about being at a party where in a room full of smoke. Had I interrupted their story to say, "Are you talking about marijuana?" and gasped, and then they're not going to tell me what happened later that night and about how there was a sexual assault later that night. So does that make sense? Sometimes you need to sit on your hands and hear what they're trying to tell you, and you can swing back around to something later to teach them about something or to try and give them some extra coping skills. So try and understand when your children are talking to you, what is their perspective? Try and put yourself in their shoes so that you can try to understand where they're coming from. You don't have to agree with them, just try to understand, keeping in mind that our children are oftentimes very different from us in terms of personality. And then try to ask questions and reflect your understanding back to the child in your own words so you could see if you do understand. So let's just say it was the situation in which the kid skipped lunch. And so you said, so you were afraid to go into the cafeteria because you felt like you didn't fit in there and nobody wanted you to sit at their table. So you were too afraid to go into the cafeteria. If the child said, no, that wasn't it, it's that Jimmy was in there and he was talking about Joey, and I was so mad I was going to punch him in the face, so I just had to get out of there. Okay, that's a whole nother problem. We could work with you on some anger management skills. But you would understand where the child was coming from, and they would be talking to you about what was bothering them in their life. Active listening isn't easy, especially if you're in, a single parent home and it's homework night and everybody needs a bath and the sink is full of dishes. However, when we do create a place where children are talking to us about what's bothering them, it avoids problems getting into really getting a lot worse than what they might have been. So what do children need from a living situation? A sense of security, gained through a stable environment, a minimal number of changes, and when children are able to ease into changes, it feels more steady to them and it helps them to adjust better to the divorce. Here are some ways to try and help a child to ease from one home to another home. Child safety zone is one. So try and make the time that you are exchanging the child from one home to another a conflict-free time for the children. So just saying stuff like, I know you're going to have a great time. I love you so much. I'll call you later on tonight. Just kind of keep it peaceful and keep it focused on the child because they're the ones who are facing the biggest change right now. Consider your child's perspective. Moving from one home to another with different rules can be difficult to adjust to. So you want to make this a calm and peaceful time to them. If there are special needs for your child, let's just say your child still wets the bed and they went up in size on the pull-ups that they wear. You share that information with the other parent, of course. If communicating about whatever the issue is might lead to a conflict, then don't discuss it in front of the child. Having a routine schedule with flexibility for special events is helpful for both the parents and for children. And allowing the older children some say so about when they want to see their parent can be helpful. However, children shouldn't be allowed to cancel a visit. If you're running late, just like as if you were going to work, letting the other person know that you're running late or that there was some traffic is a nice way to keep things courteous and polite between the two of you. And keep in mind that both houses should be home for the child. So there should be chores, things that the child enjoys doing, and some consistency in the rules of the houses. So that is our PowerPoint on helping children to cope with divorce. If you have, please take the exams and return them back to us in the way that is specified in the directions. If you need special assistance with the exams because of a reading disability or something like that, please let us know so that we can work with you to make sure that you get credit for this class. And thank you so much for your time and attention. I appreciate it.